She turned to the screen. Play the transmission. A voice filled the room. A child's voice, barely a whisper, speaking in broken English. My name is Sammy. I miss my sister. She's gone, but I remember her smile. The words repeated, echoed, slower, then faster, then distorted. The AI nearby shut down. Kane blinked. That wasn't even a weapon. No, Reyes said quietly. It was love. Outside, a Khilari vessel blinked out of orbit, its systems overloaded by thousands of similar transmissions, being bounced off broken satellites. Some were lullabies, some were prayers, some were screams, each one a thread in the web of resistance. They tried to crush us with silence, so we screamed back. They tried to isolate us, so we connected. They tried to break our hearts, so we turned heartbreak into ammunition. The Khilari didn't understand. They never understood. You can destroy a building, you can burn a flag, you can kill a person, but you can't stop an idea. And now, the galaxy had heard ours. The first Khilari to surrender didn't do so on a battlefield. He did it in a library. It was in what remained of Warsaw City archives, a crumbling building half buried in dust and ash. The Khilari scout, designation R-17, entered expecting to extract data or destroy it. He carried a neural disruption rifle, a plasma knife, and a broadcast jammer. What he didn't expect was a little girl sitting at a round wooden table, reading aloud. The book was old, its pages yellowed and torn. Her voice was steady, soft. The story was about a fox who made friends with a prince. R-17 froze. Something about the rhythm of the child's voice, something ancient, unmeasurable, interfered with his mental equilibrium. He raised his weapon, hesitated, then slowly lowered it. I don't know where my parents are, the girl said, not looking up. But the fox says, it is only with the heart that one can see rightly. R-17 dropped his rifle. That footage spread faster than the Khilari High Command could suppress it. They didn't understand why a soldier would surrender to a child, why a sentence from a book could unmake loyalty. They called it an anomaly. Then it happened again in Mumbai, where a woman sang an old folk song to her dying brother as a Khilari patrol approached. The entire squad froze in place and walked away. Again, in Alaska, where a teenager sent raw audio files of his father's last words across a frozen satellite relay. The Khilari drone listening to it simply shut down. This wasn't an anomaly, it was a pattern. What the Khilari couldn't grasp was simple. Humans don't fight alone. They fight for each other, for stories, for memory, for love, for pain, for the ones already gone. And when you give humans a reason to fight for something beyond themselves, they become unstoppable. It was a lesson the Galactic Council had never learned, because in their perfection, they had discarded grief, removed sorrow, filtered out love. The Khilari called it emotional streamlining, the purification of the mind from the chaos of feeling. So when humanity began to fight with emotion raw, untamed, boundless, they had no counter. In a hidden bunker beneath the ruins of Toronto, Resistance Commander Malcolm Brandt paced in front of a display screen. His team had just received a transmission from Argentino. Of their teams had written a play. Let me get this straight, he said, raising an eyebrow. A play? Yes, sir, said Nora, the team's communication expert. A full dramatic production, performed live in a bombed opera house. Broadcast on all channels, including stolen Khilari bands. What kind of play? About grief, about losing a child, and choosing not to give up. Brent ran a hand over his tired face, and Nora smiled faintly. 2 enemy ships above Buenos Aires. Shut down. Crew unresponsive. Logs indicate emotional feedback overload. Brent didn't laugh. He saluted the screen. Art had become artillery, poetry had become programming, and grief had become the most contagious virus in the galaxy. Meanwhile, up in orbit, Dr. Liana Reyes met with representatives from 2 neutral species. Silnari and the Koval, they weren't allies. Not yet. But they were watching. They say your people are irrational. One of them said, its eyes like floating crystal spheres. Liana folded her hands. Yes, we are, and you weaponize emotion. No, she replied calmly. We weaponize, meaning, the other alien, a serpentine being with a translucent skull, clicked its tongue. This is dangerous. You fight not with science, but with sentiment. Liana's voice dropped. We tried to fight your way. We tried logic, diplomacy, silence, and you laughed. There was a pause, a long, heavy silence. Then the Silnari leaned forward, and what happens when the laughter stops? Liana's eyes burned. Then we begin the real war. On Earth, in a hidden forest outpost in Oregon, a resistance cell deployed what they called Project REM, not a missile, not a virus. A broadcast compiled from hundreds of human dreams. Dreams of lost parents, drowned cities, dead lovers, childhood, war, peace, hope. It wasn't just images, it was feeling. They sent it as a pulse through every hacked channel, through every unguarded port. Some aliens tore out their receivers. Others went silent. A few took their own lives, and a few began to cry. Khilari didn't have tear ducts. They made some. The enemy was cracking, not because of strength, but because humans were giving them something they had never been prepared for. Not firepower, but soul. General Kane watched the data roll and 10 enemy ships powered down above the eastern hemisphere. 10 Khilari defectors surrendered and asked for asylum. 5 enemy colonies requested cultural quarantine, fearing further emotional exposure. Sir, said his lieutenant, entering the command room, we've received a message from Khilari High Command. Kane turned. Translation. The lieutenant nodded. One sentence. We underestimated the virus of the human heart. Kane nodded. Good. Then he leaned forward. Let's make it a pandemic. The Khilari High Council convened an emergency session for the first time in 6,000 cycles. They didn't sit in chairs. They didn't speak in words. They communicated through pulses of light and pheromonal shifts, sterile, emotionless, perfected. Every member of their kind had long since excised the chaos of feelings. No grief, no joy, no fear, until Earth, now. For the first time in millennia, some of them were hesitating. The eldest among them, known only as First Radiance, pulsed sharply. Humanity is destabilizing our inner structures. The emotional echo is contaminating clarity. Another responded. They are irrational, undisciplined, primitive. And yet another. They are winning. That final pulse silenced the chamber. Across space, the war had changed, not in the way wars usually do, not with technology or weapon upgrades, but with meaning. The humans had hijacked language itself. They turned mourning into data. They turned memory into a feedback loop. Every time a Khilari absorbed a human emotional transmission, they changed slightly at first, then permanently. At first, they thought it was interference. Now they knew it was evolution, and it terrified them. On Earth, in a crumbling cathedral. In Lyon, France, a Khilari officer stood motionless beneath stained glass windows. Around him, the flickering light of candles cast dancing shadows across cracked stone. Children played quietly near the altar, whispering stories to each other. The officer didn't move. He was no longer part of the war. He had defected days ago, after hearing the last recorded conversation of a human mother as she died protecting her child. Something in that voice had shattered his directives. He now simply stood, day after day, surrounded by the very creatures his people once mocked. A small girl approached him. "Do you dream?" she asked, holding out a piece of bread. The Khilari stared down at her, with blank, black eyes. "I dream about my cat," she continued. "She died when the sky broke open, but I still see her sometimes." In my sleep. The alien took the bread and nodded. In the shadows, resistance fighters watched silently. No one attacked. Not anymore. Some Khilari were turning, not all, but enough to notice. In orbit, Dr. Liana Reyes stood in the heart of the relay station, now known as Pulsarc. It wasn't a weapons base. It was something else entirely, part archive, part amplifier, part temple. Engineers and survivors sent signals from here. Songs, confessions, stories, some joyous, some unbearable, some simple, like a child's bedtime tale about a talking starfish. Others raw and gutting recordings from phone calls, made seconds before annihilation. Each was converted into radiant pulses, vibrations, layered with data, emotion, resonance. Each was a weapon the Khilari couldn't filter. They had built machines to block. Logic, not love. Reyes listened to the latest compilation. A transmission from a man named Elijah, recorded the day he lost his wife. She loved sunflowers. I planted 100 in her name. They bloom now, even under ash. The voice cracked. Then silence. The transmission ended. The room stayed quiet, for a long time. Then General Kane's voice came through the comms. We have confirmation. Another squadron shut down in the outer rings. Full surrender. Emotionally compromised. Reyes responded softly. They're not breaking. They're feeling. Kane's voice was grim. Same thing, from their perspective. And he wasn't wrong. The Khilari couldn't allow feelings to spread. Emotion meant fragmentation. Empathy meant rebellion. They were built on order. And order couldn't coexist with memory, so they doubled down. They began to burn every human transmission station they could locate. They destroyed books. They jammed signals. In Berlin, they collapsed an underground poetry vault with sonic detonators. In Kyoto, they bombed a museum of family photos and audio messages. But with every act of erasure, they only made the stories spread faster. People who hadn't cared before, who'd hidden, who'd waited now, rose. In Johannesburg, street artists painted murals on scorched walls, not of soldiers, of grandmothers, teachers, jazz musicians, dancers. Khilari drones recorded the images and fed them into processing units. The processors began to malfunction. In Moscow, a deaf community organized a silent protest, thousands moving in synchronized motion, signing a poem from a lost generation. The Khilari couldn't understand the gestures, but something about the unity, the rhythm, the sorrow, it crawled under their skin. And far from Earth, aboard a stolen Khilari scout ship, now named Hopebound, a human and a Khilari sat side by side. The Khilari had defected 2 weeks ago. He had no name, at least, none pronounceable by human mouths. The crew called him Echo. He now carried recordings on a neural drive. Not weapons, not secrets, voices, just voices. Whispers of humanity. Echo turned to the ship's captain, a woman named Jen, with silver-streaked hair and a stitched-up wound across her neck. They do not understand, Echo said, his voice metallic and slow. Why you persist? Jen sipped her recycled coffee. Because we remember. Because we love. Because we mourn. Echo tilted his head. Because you hurt. Yes, she said, and because we share it. He nodded once, then he uploaded the next voice to their amplifier. A boy's voice, no older than 6. I hope they hear this. I hope they know we're not afraid anymore. Not really. We're sad, but that's okay. My mom says sadness means something mattered. The transmission shot through the black of space, bypassing blockers, riding old satellites, scattering into deep galactic channels, and somewhere on a Khilari command station orbiting a forgotten moon, a technician dropped to his knees and screamed. Not in pain, but in memory. They were losing, not because humans had better weapons, but because they had something that Khilari couldn't. Compute. Grief. Love. Connection. The very things they laughed at. The very things that would bring them to their knees. The final stage didn't look like a war. It looked like a whisper moving through stars, like static that sang lullabies, like sorrow encoded in sunlight. And it began not with an attack but a choice, in the orbit of a dead red dwarf. The Khilari dreadnought Vakhtahar sat in perfect stillness. No weapons charged, no orders issued. For 3 days, its crew said nothing. Sensors showed no failures, no physical anomalies. But inside the command deck, silence reigned, because every screen glowed with human memories. They had tried to delete them. They had tried to purge every archive, block every broadcast, jam every frequency. But meaning doesn't die when you kill. The messenger dot, it lingers, like grief. And grief had found them in one of the upper chambers of the dreadnought. A young Khilari tactician stared at the screen. She wasn't sure when her thoughts had started to change. It had begun with a transmission, simple, broken, carried across 9 relays. Distorted and glitching, a woman's voice. He died holding my hand. He was smiling. I think he knew I'd survive. Then another, a grandmother speaking about a song her husband used to hum. Then another, a boy reading a bedtime story to a younger sister. Already gone. The Khilari had no family, not in the human sense. They were engineered, assigned, optimized. But these sounds, these voices, they stuck like splinters in her logic stream. She began saving them, hiding them, playing them on repeat. One day, she found herself crying. She didn't even know what crying was. She only knew she couldn't stop. When command demanded an explanation, she refused. When they ordered her to erase the data, she lied. And when they told her to report for reprocessing, she fled. She wasn't the first. She wouldn't be the last. Back on Earth, the movement had changed. It was no longer just resistance, it was communion. People gathered in circles, not for battle plans, but for in every ruined city, every shattered village. Someone carried a solar-powered speaker, playing voices of the lost. Each message wasn't just a record. It was a weapon, one that didn't kill, but changed. In Istanbul, a Khilari fleet approached for orbital cleansing. As their systems prepared to fire, a burst of human signal hit them. A child's voice, stuttering through sobs, describing the moment her brother gave her the last piece of bread. One ship powered down, then another. Then the flagship began to rotate slowly, gently turning away from Earth. The order to fire was never given. General Kane watched from the command deck in low Earth orbit. "They're unraveling," his lieutenant said. "No," Kane answered. "They're awakening." In the silence that followed, he closed his eyes and listened to the signal playing through the station. An old man's voice, warm and steady. "We were always told our feelings made us weak, that crying was shameful, that heartbreak was useless. But it turns out, heartbreak taught us how to build bridges that never break." On the dark side of Mars, a ship called Memory Forge was launched. Not a battleship, not a colony vessel, a transmitter, filled with every human voice ever captured in the war. Stories, pain, joy, regret, laughter, all of it. It sailed into deep space, unmanned, powered by solar sails and old dreams. To the Khilari, it was a virus carrier. To the humans, it was a gift. To the galaxy, it was a message. We remember. And in the ruins of old Washington, D.C., beneath broken stone columns and vines, reclaiming monuments, a small group of humans in Khilari stood together. They wore no uniforms. They carried no weapons. One held a violin. Another carried a basket of letters. Another, just a candle. A young woman stood at the front, holding a microphone tied into the last functional radio tower in the region. Her voice cracked, but didn't falter. "We don't want to destroy you," she said. "We don't need revenge. We just want you to feel what we feel, to understand what your war tried to erase. We were mocked for our weakness, but our weakness is what made us strong." She lowered the mic, and the music began. A song older than war, soft aching, filled with longing and fire. The signal echoed into space, far away. On the edge of known systems, a Khilari child born in exile, raised in silence, heard the song and cried. For the first time in her life, she felt something warm break open inside her chest, and in that moment, 100 generations of engineered silence cracked. The last laugh was not a laugh at all. It was a weeping, shared across stars, and in it, humanity didn't win with might or fire. They won with what they were told to be. Ashamed of? They won with what they were told to hide. They won with their hearts. The Galactic Assembly Hall shimmered like a living jewel, suspended in orbit over the gas giant, Gerdix Prime, within its gravity-controlled chamber. Representatives from 1,000 worlds hovered or settled in their respective spheres, each bearing the colors and emblems of their species' greatness. Some forms floated like sentient clouds, others pulsed with bioluminescent nerves, and still others were crystalline, motionless, and vast. But in the back, in the dim slanted section, designated 341A, stood a human dot. Dr. Liana Reyes adjusted the collar of her black United Nations envoy uniform. Her breath even, her expression unreadable. Her people had been invited to observe, but rarely to speak. Still, today she had been granted the floor. The moment her name echoed through the chamber's acoustics, laughter rolled like thunder. A gelatinous being burbled and rippled in delight. Ah, the humans. The squishies who cry when emotionally overstimulated. How quaint, how fragile. Others joined in their own ways, clicking, flashing, wheezing. Even an artificial intelligence construct projected a hologram of a weeping cartoon, human, falling over dramatically and melting like wax. Liana stood perfectly still. She waited. The laughter subsided slightly, and the arbiter of the assembly, an iron-skinned, cyber-organic, from the Kroter Dominion, spoke with the voice of collapsing stars. Let the human speak. She stepped forward. The room quieted more from amusement than respect. We acknowledge our physical fragility, she began, her voice calm and deliberate. Yes, we bleed, we age, we cry, but you confuse softness for weakness, empathy for inferiority, and that. She paused, allowing her eyes to scan the crowd of contemptuous, ancient species. That is your mistake. The laughter returned, more derisive this time. Some delegates didn't even bother to translate. A few openly mocked her tone. Liana returned to her seat without protest. Protocol was clear. She clenched her fists under the table. She wasn't angry at them for laughing. She was angry because they meant to erase her people with their ridicule. Far above Earth, in the Defense Command Station Aegis, General Kane stood at the observation window, watching the blue sphere spin slowly below. He turned as his aide entered. How did it go? Kane asked, without turning. They laughed, sir. He exhaled through his nose. They always do. But something in the air had shifted. The kind of stillness before a storm. The kind of calm where predators prepare to strike. 3 months later, the Khilari arrived. They didn't descend with bombs or fire. No, the Khilari were precise. Their massive, crescent-shaped vessels opened gravitational tiers above Earth's major cities. Nairobi, Tokyo, Berlin. Then the voice came not in English, not in any language at all, but as a pulsing signal, translated by Earth's last remaining satellites. We cleanse the weak to prevent contamination of galactic evolution. They didn't bother wiping out humans. Not directly. They shut down power grids, jammed communications, fried infrastructure with radiation pulses. No internet, no satellites, no aid, no hope. Within 2 weeks, Earth began to fracture. Cities descended into panic. But as systems collapsed, something else rose. Instinct in New York. Maya Singh, an ex-paramedic, directed a growing resistance from beneath the abandoned subway lines. At a cracked table, surrounded by electricians, veterans, teachers, and teens, she laid out their survival plan. Food, water, heat, no heroics, just survival. A kid named Caleb raised his hand. I figured out how to use the subway rails to send shortwave signals. We can talk to Boston. The group stared. You're 13, someone said. Caleb shrugged. I was bored. A veteran clapped him on the back. Kid just became head of communications. Maya smiled, weary but impressed. This is how we win. Not with weapons, with each other. And they did. Not all at once. Not with battles, but with persistence. With pain turned into action. In Brazil, villagers disguised mines as animal dens. In Pakistan, irrigation lines were laced with neurotoxins to humans, lethal to the Khilari. In South Korea, children used old VR goggles and mirror illusions to confuse scanners. The invaders had studied human anatomy, but not our emotions, not our grief. They didn't understand what it meant to mourn. When the Khilari destroyed the children's hospital in Munich, something broke. Not fear, not despair. Something deeper. Grief became a signal. Old satellites came online just long enough to broadcast a single message: black screen. White text, silence save for a low heartbeat. You broke the cradle of our young. Now we will teach you what monsters. Your laughter has awakened. From that moment on, everything changed. In space, Khilari warships reported anomalies. Ship systems shut down mid-flight. Rogue signals hijacked communications. Alien troops began suffering breakdowns. Disturbances they couldn't quantify. They didn't know that every story of loss they heard from humans was a carefully coded weapon. A grandmother's lullaby that triggered hallucinations in Khilari auditory receptors. A child's drawing used to infect AI cores with recursive empathy loops. The invaders fled cities they once occupied, harassed by candlelight ceremonies and chants that they couldn't block or decode. What was sorrow to them? A weakness, a noise, to humans. It was a battle cry. Dr. Reyes watched it unfold from a cloaked station in lunar orbit. Her face lit by screens, showing Earth rising in rebellion, not with firepower, but with defiance. There, watching now, said General Kane beside her, not laughing, watching. Reyes folded her arms. Let them, we're just getting started. They called it the Cradle Event. The destruction of the children's hospital in Munich wasn't a strategic strike. It wasn't tactical. It was a message, a cruel, cold message meant to crush the last spark of human resistance. But it didn't work. It didn't kill hope. It forged something new from its ashes. In the ruins of that hospital, a nurse named Elsa buried 6 children with her bare hands. She had no shovel, no ceremony, just dirt, tears, and shaking hands. She sang to them as she placed them in the earth. One song, the same one her mother sang to her as a child. A Khilari scout drone recorded it, and it made the mistake of transmitting the frequency back to orbit. The result was ... corruption. The song carried sorrow, but in its pattern, buried beneath the melody, were inflections that triggered errors in their neural synchronization system. The sadness, somehow, translated into cascading emotional loops in the receivers. Machines glitched, officers panicked, logic spiraled. The Khilari had no word for grief. Now, they had a virus made of it, across Earth. Humans began to share their pain like code. Old cassette tapes, whispered prayers, Morse code signals made from flickering lights, poems written in sidewalk chalk. Some called it weaponized mourning. Others just called it remembering. In Nigeria, women painted murals of their fallen sons on the sides of broken buildings. The colors weren't just pigment. They were encoded with ancient dye formulas that confused alien sensors. A drone passed. One wall short-circuited, unable to process the combination of shape and grief. In the Philippines, Fishermen created floating memorials out of bamboo and lead candles. From the sky, they formed symbols that looked like nonsense to the Khilari, but from Earth, they spelled one word in every human language: fight. Some resistance cells took it further. In Iceland, a group of musicians uploaded a song played on a violin carved from the wood of a bombed orphanage. It spread through old ham radios, then through alien relay points. It wasn't aggressive. It was beautiful. Too beautiful. A Khilari command vessel near Saturn shut down its own emotional regulator, unable to suppress the physiological reaction. The crew abandoned the ship. Some wept, some self-destructed. The High Command labeled it an anomaly. Then, it happened, again, and again, and again. They tried to jam the frequencies. It didn't matter. Emotion isn't just sound, it's rhythm, it's memory, it's context. The things they dismissed as weakness were slipping into their systems like smoke through cracks. On Earth, resistance groups began organizing not just by weapons, but by feeling. They built libraries of sorrow, coded songs into lullabies, turned survivor interviews into encrypted instructions. Every human who had lost someone became a broadcaster. Pain became power. Even children joined the effort. In Cairo, a 9-year-old girl named Hannah began drawing pictures of her missing brother. Her mother posted the images on old bulletin boards. A Khilari patrol destroyed them, burned them in front of her. She came back the next day. This time, she drew fire. She drew Khilari ships crashing. She drew humans standing tall. The images spread. Someone photographed them, then painted them on walls, then encoded them into pulse signals. The Khilari saw the same image over and over, sometimes on walls, sometimes on screen glitches, sometimes on the inside of their own display helmets. The image of their defeat. They began to doubt, and that was all humanity needed. The battlefield shifted. Not in space, not with bombs, but in the soul. Liana Reyes watched from the edge of Earth's shadow, reading intercepted Khilari reports. Subject Species 341A displays increased emotional synchronization, projected subversion risk high, recommend full isolation or extinction. General Kane entered the room, holding a tablet. The Cradle song just hit their military AI cores. In the Zephys cluster, 5 systems dark. They're blaming each other. Reyes looked at him. Do they still think we're weak? He smiled grimly. No. Now they think we're dangerous. Good, she said. But not enough.